Well, we can have so many topics to discuss, but I would like to just introduce this panel, taking some of the thoughts that Dr. Hart has just shared with us. And I will expand a little bit if you allow me. What we've heard this morning could be a little bit like some aspects of science that can be used for good or for bad. I want to give you an example. We've learned so much from Dr. Schultz about the role of, I would say, the environment on the expression of some information, some of those books, some of those pages of the book, some of the information that we have. That's wonderful. If somebody is going to say, wow, this is a gift from God, and I'm going to apply it. With God's help, I'm going to be a pregnant woman, a father, I'm going to apply it. But now let's try and imagine the following. That somebody will see a pregnant woman eating some chocolate. And we'll go with the same information that Dr. Schultz shared with us today and says, look, you are methylating or non-methylating your gene. And that's very bad for you, and it's actually going to bring suffering onto your third generation. And I must confess that I've seen that often enough to say that there is a potential risk that out of this conference that some of us will feel enabled and empowered and mandated to become judges on the epigenetics of somebody else. Okay, but now, this is a healing conference. And I think that it should be healing also on our perceptions of the health message. And so these are just introductory thoughts on something that you said, and David, you touched on, and then I heard it from Dr. Fraser as well. Now, I want to go back to something that Heidi shared with us right in the beginning. You had a slide where you said that predisposition is not the same as predestination. Now, we're not talking about theological terms here. Predisposition is not the same as predestination. My question to the panel is, how much, and Heidi rolled her eyes, how much can one control by doing the right things? Because we see that many times that you can implement many of these things into your life, and you still end up sick. How much? We hear statistics like saying 35% or 40% of cancers may be related with certain lifestyle practices. How much in a sin-filled world, where we cannot control what our grandparents did in a way, okay, how much is epigenetics becoming just one more fashion, or is it really, as far as we know today, is a very heavyweight component of wellness and well-being? Who wants to take this question? Dr. Schultz. But anyone can take that, but...
Well, I think that's a very good point that Dr. Hart then made. I have this slide, I didn't show it. I think we're going to find out that regrettably much is said even before we were born. So many diabetics, they can do something in their lifestyle to lower their values and so on, but there is a big component that we got from our parents and their lifestyles.
So we think it's big. Okay.
I'll give you an illustration. You already know that I work a lot with Native Americans. Native Americans have some of the highest rates of diabetes in the world. But roughly 100 years ago, we have data going back to one of the most diabetes-affected populations. They're the Pima Indians in what would be the southwestern part of the United States. Essentially no diabetes around 1900. We know they're genetically predisposed, but we also know that lifestyle has a huge component. The practical message to me is this: when it comes to me or my patients, I need to live like I'm not genetically cursed, because we don't know the reversibility of disease in any individual. But then when it comes to this whole area of judging or assessing why I'm not doing well or why someone isn't doing well, we have to have that charitable attitude that there are these things that are not controllable, whether it's the early life experiences, the domestic violence, the genetics. So I mean, to me, that's the practical way. When we're working with people, give them the benefit of the doubt, because many of these diseases have a reversible component, but then when it comes to the outcomes, not everyone responds the same way. So it's more pragmatic, it's not really an answer. But I'll add one thing to it, and that is we have the promise that when we cooperate with God using the natural remedies, that God adds supernatural blessings as well. And all of us who are clinicians, we've seen our expectations sometimes overwhelmingly exceeded, even though we've had other experiences where we're underwhelmed with what happens.
Now, Dr. Hart, you obviously, sorry, Dr. Fraser, you were going to say something.
Well, I think in one sense the whole area of gene expression is exciting and changes things. In another sense, it doesn't change anything much from the point of view of an epidemiologist. For instance, we've known for a long time that what we eat in terms of saturated fat changes our blood cholesterol. To some extent, really, that's largely just a change of the expression of a gene in the liver. So it doesn't have anything to do with, in utero kind of stuff. But the fact that in epidemiology we've known all along that we're dealing with a whole group of people, some that have different genetic predispositions in terms of genomes and also gene expression. And on top of that, on average, we ask, given all that variability that's underlying, do people on average who live this way have a different experience from people on average who live that way? So that's still true. But what we're learning is much more about the mechanisms of what makes it true.
Yes, and I think that Heidi and Dr. Hart, you are probably investing quite a few million in your new area of research in epigenetics. That helps to explain some of these data, really, at the molecular level. And now, I want to ask you, you are investing that amount of money. We have no idea how much. I mean, it's not the purpose of your presence here, but medical science, quo vadis, in healing. You are investing heavily in an institution probably that has one of the largest budgets in the Adventist health systems, okay? You are making strategic decisions. And you've alluded to you were very clear actually, saying that we need more institutions to do something, not just to be present, but to promote healing. Now, you are investing in highly technological institutions. Tell us, what is your vision for medical institutions? You've shared some with us, but in the context of knowing more about the detail.
Well, I think there's several things that institutions give us that we can't do otherwise in the church. Research is one of them. I mean, you can't collect a group of researchers significantly and get external funding without an institutional base. High-tech sort of stuff, that all has value. I mean, I'm always impressed that, when people want to change their behavior, they can often do so at a low-tech level, but when they develop cancer, they want high-tech stuff. They want to come to a place that can provide the most modern care. So I think it's important for the research aspect. The other aspect that institutions provide is training. It's difficult to have educational institutions that are not based at larger larger educational entities. So for both of those reasons, that's certainly why Loma Linda feels like it has to stay on the cutting edge of medical science to be able to maintain both the research and the educational components that it needs for the church. If I can just say on the epigenetics thing, for years we've known that genetics controls our behavior and risk of disease. Now we know that behavior controls genetics. And that's good news, because in fact now we have the ability to shift this dial the other way and to be able to, through epigenetics, be able to turn these switches on and off so that even when we've got bad genes, we have the potential for starting to correct them through generational sorts of impacts. See, it's that kind of research that we need to have, in my view, an Adventist perspective conducting that research so we come out with an interpretation consistent with our church.
And we all know that Adventists have been leading in the research in certain areas, usually related to lifestyle practices, and Loma Linda has been perhaps, it has been the main institution leading in the research in that area. And what we've heard a lot today has come out of this institution. So we are very quick to use these, but now let me tell you that as I mingle with church members around this division and the world, I often find that there is a sense of, look, too much money is being used in these institutions. It should be used in small little clinics, lifestyle centers, somewhere. That's where the mission is. But I must confess that many times the arguments that people are using to back up the lifestyle practices and promotion actually come from these institutions. And if it wasn't for these institutions, they wouldn't be speaking like they do. We need to have some understanding that, and this could be healing, because I know there are people in this audience that feel that way. And if this conference is going to be healing, not just for our bodies, but also for our spiritual lives, and for our emotional lives, and now for our institutional life, let's call it, we need to understand that.
Viriato, I wish Loma Linda could claim credit for Heidi. We can't. But if Gary didn't have a Loma Linda as a research base, if David didn't have a place to be trained,
exactly,
you would not have professionals doing this kind of work.
Exactly. And I wish we could feel that and experience that as a body, that there is a need. For God, millions of dollars. He owns what?
Yeah, I think
he owns everything. Yes, Heidi.
I think it's a very good point. I've lived it myself. I know about research in an Adventist setting. It's difficult, and it would be really great if we would support that more.
Yes, David.
From my standpoint, there's two streams that we have to address. And one of the challenges we have that I think we have to be very careful with, a lot of times when we look at the Inspired Council, we often say that doesn't apply anymore. And we've got to be very careful with that logic. But I think if you follow two streams in the spirit of prophecy, you end up with valuing both. And I'm not saying I'm giving you a comprehensive perspective, but let me just talk about two streams. One of the reasons we were to have Adventist medical institutions is to care for the needs of our own people so that they wouldn't be compelled to go to non-believers. And as Dr. Hart aptly pointed out, if I have a condition, whether it's a traumatic condition, whether it's a cancer, whether it's some issue that needs higher tech services, if I have a child who needs open heart surgery, I would love for us to have access to Adventist medical institutions where people are trying to seek to be informed by the principles that we have and led by the Holy Spirit. That today requires large institutions because of economies of scale and other things. The problem is there's a special need, and Ellen White articulated this, for those smaller home-like institutions. They're not mutually exclusive. And so I work right now in one of those centers at Weimar, and I've worked at smaller centers and I've worked at larger centers, and have trained and worked in both too. They have a unique role, and I think we have to value both. The unique role of this smaller sanitarium is to have a team of people who have a spiritual focus. It's an evangelistic unit, if you will, in a community. And many of us in some circles we think the large Adventist institutions that are largely run by non-Adventists are fulfilling that need. They're not. That doesn't mean they're bad. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have them. But it's a different need. And so I think when we speak about institutions, we have to acknowledge that there's a need for more than one model. Instead of, arguing about what's better, I think there's biblical spirit of prophecy grounds to say that we need both.
Could we speak of one model only that incorporates all of these aspects? One model that includes large institutions, academic institutions, research, and includes the small lifestyle center like Weimar has been, and Weimar has been a tremendous influence around the world. So one model, that's God's plan for His church. Could we speak of something like this? Dr. Hart, is this in your heart? It is in mine. It is in mine. I believe that it is a God-given model, not two models, just one that incorporates this system.
Let me share with you, and some of you heard this story, but one of the best funded lifestyle centers in the world of the Adventist Church was Lifestyle Centers of America in Ardmore, Oklahoma. One of our graduates from Linda actually inherited considerable oil wealth from his father, put up $30 million to develop this lifestyle center. And they built a beautiful lodge, had 3,000 acres, hiking trails, the ideal setting in every sense. Beautiful kitchen, educational kitchen, and so on. They ran that for about probably 10 or 15 years and just gave up. They basically just recently sold it because it wasn't working. Because
Dick, be careful about your rationale. I was one of the physicians, that opened that facility. Be careful about saying it wasn't working, unless you want to hear some rebuttal.
Okay, let me clarify, because this is what I've heard from Sydney and from Franklin House and the people there. It worked, but the amount of money per person they helped was considerable. In other words, I forget the exact figure, but it's in the thousands of dollars, because the recidivism rate for people who had gone through it was about 90% after 1 year, and the amount of money they invested to run it was considerable. So that model, the board, you were there, David, I wasn't, the board has decided it was not an effective model to do what they were trying to do.
Well, let me give you the background, because you don't know this and you've heard one side. It was published in the Review, actually, too. They took out a full-page ad to tell their story. What actually happened with this institution is basically the leadership lost a Bible and spirit of prophecy model for running a ministry. And I can tell you what hurt them financially. The original physicians there, like myself, were willing to work at a denominational wage. When they lost the vision, within 5 years of my leaving, they had to triple the wages of the physicians to get physicians to work at what now had become more of a secularly driven model. Why I object so vehemently is because the individuals that have said it didn't work and it was too costly, yes, it's too costly to run an Adventist lifestyle center as a business and not as a ministry, and that's the path they went down. That's what sunk that institution. That's why mission-driven people like myself left. So I don't think that condemns the sanitarium or small lifestyle center model.
But I don't think that that's what you were trying to say. Dr. Hart, please finish your rationale.
My rationale is I'm totally supportive of small lifestyle centers. But my point is they are not able to do the research and the training that we need to have happen. So we need all of that. Lifestyle Centers of America, as I understand it, gradually wanted to get into research, into evidence-based sort of stuff, to conduct studies, and when they concluded that, in fact, the cost-effectiveness of what they're doing wasn't there. Now, maybe because of salaries, I argue that point, but the cost-effectiveness wasn't there enough, so they're now looking for other models to use to try to support what they're trying to do.
Dr. Fraser.
I've not had the close association with the centres that others have, but over about 30 years I've visited a number of them, been to Weimar several times, been asked to get involved in research a number of times, and so I'm supportive of them too. But, and I think that providing they can be made kind of economically feasible, however that happens, they do a wonderful job for the people involved. However, as a practitioner in my office, you know, I sometimes see people that have severe coronary artery disease, for instance, that's not amenable to bypass because it's very diffuse, or coronary stenting or things of that sort. People that would almost certainly benefit from going to a centre like this. But one, they often can't afford it. And two, there is a very substantial problem of recidivism, which doesn't undo the benefit that happens. And, you know, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I'm sure that, you know, something like a third of people get remarkable long-term benefits, another third get some benefits, but then there's some that really, they recidivate. And that's okay. Life is not perfect, and we do good. But I guess the point I'd like to make is that to a considerable extent, they're very good, helpful, beneficial, but I think they're an incomplete model if we want to really help all the people that need help in the community.
Yes, and it's clear that they would not be using many of the arguments they're using to convince their patients or their clients of the need to change their diet if there hadn't been research in the background providing all the data that they can be used. I mean, I think that we need to have a broad understanding that there is a place for these institutions. In fact, there's a place for highly academic institutions and high care, like institutions like Loma Linda and Florida Hospital and others. Okay, Dr. Hart, yes.
In the U.S. now, and I think it's happening here as well, there is a growing push for what's referred to as evidence-based medicine.
Yes.
Do good stuff, but prove to us that it works. We'll only reimburse if you can prove it works. That is opening up, that together with what we call bundled payments, meaning I'm going to take care of a diabetic, regardless of what it takes, I'll take care of that diabetic for one payment. Those trends are going to give the Adventist Church an opportunity to get funding to get paid for doing what we do so well, that lifestyle sorts of stuff. But we've got to do it in a way that is solidly based on research evidence. And that's why I don't want to see us overclaim what we can do. On the other hand, I don't want to see us underclaim, because we do have something to offer in this emerging economic climate that can be very significant for the church's institutions.
Yes.
The other part of this integrated model that addresses the recidivism issue is the local church. And that's the thing that we need to pull into the equation. So, yeah, I think we're speaking on the same level. Dick, you know, you just got me on a sensitive point there, if you couldn't tell. But I think a lot of people have written off different parts of the model. Some have written off the big institutions, some have written off the sanitariums, some have written off the local church, but we need all these. This is all part of the divine plan, and the local church member in their own neighborhood, that next door neighbor who's helping people. So if we pull that together, that's where we've got the complete picture.
I believe that's part of the blended ministry idea, that the General Conference and not just the General Conference, that Sister White speaks very clearly about, the blended ministry, not just blending in certain areas, blending as a whole. Going back to epigenetics, going back to diet, going back to some of the numbers that Dr. Fraser shared with us, going back to a slide you had of what you shared, there was an overlapping zone, and then there was some foods on the right and on the left. You know that, okay, the methylated, what, just describe that, which foods increase methylation?
Well, broccoli,
Broccoli.
soy.
Okay, remember, broccoli, soy. All right. Now, I want to go back to that and to something that Dr. Fraser also shared and David Rose. There is a, I don't want to open a can of worms, but you know, there is a growing tension within the Adventist Church between two topics. You know, these are lacto-vegetarians, and these are vegans or total vegetarians. And you come to a potluck lunch, and you know, they look at each other. They say, you know, that's got cheese. Didn't she know that we shouldn't eat that stuff? Or, you know, look at that. What, you know, look at those ones. You know, there is these. You sense that. Do you sense that? You sense that? Yeah, I think so. You know, I believe that one of the areas that best represents the character of Christ is the healing ministry of the church. And healing is not just a matter of lowering cholesterol or the risk of cancer or whatever. Now, we are out there in the churches, and we hear these things, we experience them ourselves, we often become very critical of others. I've seen these. Fred, you've got a beautiful story that you often tell of the lady who brought, I don't know what dish that wasn't so attractive to some of the membership, okay, and how important it was that you took part of that. Now, evidence. What is out there? And please don't use it as a hammer. Okay, what you're going to hear is, I wish I could have you sign saying that I'm not going to use these in judgment of anyone. But now I want to ask those two specifically. What evidence is there for what type of more optimal diet? Is it a diet that is perhaps more on the side of total vegetarian? Or is it a diet that perhaps includes more animal products? What is the evidence out there? And I take the broccoli, but I go to Dr. Fraser first.
Well, I think the answer can be simply expressed. First, let me give a personal opinion.
Yes.
To say that there is Sister Jones, who is a strict vegetarian or a good lacto-ovo-vegetarian, what a paragon of virtue, And there's Brother Roberts over there, and he's a farmer, and he eats beef 4 times a week. So there's a brother that really needs spiritual help. I think that's wrong. I don't think that there's good biblical evidence or evidence even from Ellen White to support. So let me just, without going, I think Romans 14 and a number of other chapters can be brought into that. But back to your original question. Mm-hmm. I think the evidence at the moment is very, very strong that vegetarians do better than non-vegetarians. But whether you want to make a big case between vegans are better than lactose, are better than pescos, we don't have that evidence at the moment. As a group, they do better than the non-vegetarians. To discriminate between the different categories of vegetarian diet, we see a few trends developing, but they are still within the range of statistical variation that they could reverse themselves yet, and we need to get more numbers before they stabilize and we can really make some statements. But my original point would be that even when we do show, maybe sometime in the future, that strict vegetarians do a little better, that's good for your health, and maybe it's a kind of a spiritual discipline, but I don't think it's any evidence of moral or spiritual advantage per se, or greater righteousness.
Thank you, Dr. Fraser. And I remember vaguely hearing some numbers that about 70% or 60 or 70% of church members are not vegetarian in certain parts of the world.
Oh, yes. Now, in the United States, we don't have numbers. We only know in our study it's about 50% of non-vegetarians. 50%. But we don't know, for instance, it could be that the vegetarians were more likely to join our study. So we don't know that for sure. But in other parts of the world, actually, we recently had a little session at Loma Linda, which we looked at some international trends, and we had some people from different parts of the world. And I was quite surprised that the data they brought from Brazil, even parts of Europe and so forth, that things weren't so different in many parts of the more developed world, at least. Yeah.
So a move towards a vegetarian diet, whether it be lacto-vegetarian or a total vegetarian, just to move in that direction, let's say 20% more of church members would go in that direction. It would be a tremendous benefit for their health, wouldn't it? Okay, now from an epigenetics point of view, does it make sense to make that move? It seems so. There is a growing evidence that supports that. What are in your perceptions of future development in epigenetics? You have to think further, okay? It's You have to think where you're going in your research. What are the future developments in epigenetics?
Well, one point where people should watch out if they're eating a vegan diet is with the vitamin Bs. Because
Yes.
that's important for the whole chain of reaction for the methylation. So, I mean, if you're supplementing, okay, then it's fine, but just watch out. And about the future, I think it's open. I mean, I think it's a curtain that's slowly opening. So, I mean,
Yes.
no way of, I mean, like, in November or October last year, the ENCODE study was published. That's a very big study looking at these non-coding regions, this 98%. And there is a lot of debate going on because the authors of this very big publication said 80% of the genome is functional. So 80% has some function. We don't know what, but it has a function. And they got a lot of criticism for writing that. But so I guess, I mean, they cannot explain everything. So I think we're going to find out many new things which we even don't dream about in the next years.
I like your image. You're slowly opening the curtain. Now, I want to throw a question to all of you, perhaps. What about the component, the stress, anxiety, the emotional component of epigenetics? And I hear and alcohol and other areas, but I would like to concentrate on the emotional aspects. What is there anything coming out that is already unveiling a little bit of what the future might hold?
Well, there was a study done with women that were pregnant September 11. September 11, 2001, and they followed up on their children and the stress they lived with controls, and there are changes.
At the genetic level.
Yeah. And about alcohol, I'll be presenting this afternoon. Alcohol, I mean, it's amazing. Third, fourth generation of all following generations never having drunk alcohol. The pro-opiomelanocortin gene expression is still modulated by the alcohol that the grandmother or great-grandmother drank.
That is amazing. That's amazing. And you were just mentioning to me that the latest report of the World Cancer Research Fund, I believe, that says that there is no evidence whatsoever. I actually wrote it down. There's no evidence that supports. There's no safe level for alcohol. Yes.
Let me mention something that ties, in my mind, the last two questions together, and a theme that we've been talking about in the conference. Some Adventist member had the bad discretion, or the poor discretion, of giving me a book shortly after I came into the church as a young adult, and that book was Counsels on Diet and Foods. And I say it was poor discretion. Some people say that book should never have been written. I actually think it is one of the best books that gives an accurate philosophy of health for us as Adventists. But let me read something from page 460 of Counsels on Diet and Foods that relates to the stress element first. It says, of all the people in the world, reformers should be the most unselfish, the most kind, the most courteous. So if I haven't been that way to my brother Dick today, Dick, I apologize. But having said that, the passage doesn't end. And it's on that very same page where we're told that we have a special calling in our diet education and in our practice. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 460. It says we should be teaching people how to prepare food without the use of milk or butter. And goes on and says we should impart this knowledge as they would Bible instruction, and that we should make this plain by precept and example. And Gary, from what I'm seeing from the Adventist Health Study, it clearly, like you rightly said, the data isn't all in, but it's not pointing in the direction of undermining that counsel. It's actually seeming to affirm it. So this is not a judgmental area. But if we're not clear on what the optimal diet is, we're not going to give a certain message. I don't tell people they have to be vegans, but to me the data is pretty compelling that this is from my perspective. Now, Gary, it may be different for you epidemiologically, but when I work with patients in my office, this is what we see the best results with. And do you feel like I'm too far out there on the left, reading more into the research than is out there?
Well, we have the biggest study of strict vegetarians in the world. We've got about 8,000 or 9,000. So the questions that you pose are, very important questions. And you've had a certain experience in a clinical situation, and it may turn out that the strict vegetarians have the best health experience in the end from our study. But let me tell you that about 3 or 4 years ago, I first started, and I have concluded it was a mistake, to talk about the possible relative merits of one kind of vegetarian over another, and just opened a whole can of worms. I mean, I kept getting emails from both sides of the story, and I got all kinds of reports of what Fraser had said here, there, and the other, and there were kind of, initially it kind of looked, if you go back to HS1, the vegans weren't looking very good. They had higher risk of cancer and things like that, but the numbers were small. And so we started off with that perspective, and I started getting emails of triumphalism from non-vegans, but you're quite right. As the data from HS2 has come in more and more, the vegans are starting to look pretty good. And but if you do statistical testing, say between lacto-ovos and vegans, we're far from significant, and we've seen the data kind of flip from one to the other in the last 3 or 4 years. So I'm not ready to conclude yet that it's not going to do a little more flipping. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Now, a question: what would be a healing message to this audience and to the viewers that are watching us on TV? What would be a healing, a message of integrity, but healing message that you would like to give in relation to this subject? I'll pick on you, Dr. Hart.
Well, I think the take-home message to me is that the instructions this church got 100 plus years ago are now been scientifically validated, that in fact we're moving in the right direction and we have a message to share with the world. My struggle is, how do we take a small church relatively with meager resources and do this more effectively? But I think that the message is right on, and now we need to figure out how to deliver it.
Yes. Now, shifting gears again, Dr. Fraser, we challenged you to look beyond the Adventist health study. And you took the challenge and you incorporated the concept of well-being, wellness and well-being. And with your training, with your the gift that the Lord has given you as a researcher, you're trying to put together something that can be measured, it can be assessed, it can be studied. Now, wellness and well-being. You've given some case reports, very short ones, that help us to think about this issue. Is this perhaps a new area that the Adventist Church is moving into that could be, again, putting the church, not just putting the church on the map, because that's not the intention, but really to be a healing ministry to the church, to recognize that well-being and wellness is something that we need to look for in the future and invest money in, from a university point of view?
Well, I'm not an expert in this area, despite the fact that I got to talk on it. But I really think it should be because I think so much of what we've talked about here that's obviously very important and very valid goes beyond nutrition and physical activity, and yet we've not really incorporated that in a very formal way. And when we assess people, perhaps people that we come in contact with, obviously their whole being is very much beyond diet and physical activity. And we got really pulled into this area by the Sanitarium Health and Wellbeing Company, and as I said before, Kathy is here somewhere in the audience, I think, from that company over there. And it just highlighted for us, I think, how much work needed to be done and how much we could contribute. And the examples I gave you and some of the problems They're not things I've got answers to, actually, but I think they're things we're going to have to struggle with in real life, that if we give people scores on this, that, and the other, you can do that, and I think there's some value then, because you can then focus on those scores that are lower than ideal, if you're willing to do that. But to come up with some kind of global score, I think, has even further problems. But overall, if we, I guess I'm a scientist and an epidemiologist and so forth, and so I like measuring things. But it seems to me that the various programs within our church could probably benefit from having such an instrument that would fit our purpose.
And the world could benefit from that. Again, once again, from based on the inspired writings that the Lord has given us. Now, I would like to give an opportunity to the audience to ask questions. We've got a very patient man waiting there to ask, and we have about 10 minutes for this section. I will close about 1 minute before. Go ahead and ask your first question.
Okay, I just want to say 2 words about myself. I've been responsible for a medical school for 10 years. I've been in medical research for 30, and I work with collaboration all around the world for many years. And I also work as a senior advisor for our tertiary healthcare system in Norway. And I'd like to challenge the panel to say something about this issue. I think we all realize, both in North America and Europe, that our current healthcare system is unsustainable in the long run, economically and otherwise. We already see in Europe, in countries in the southern part, that the healthcare system is actually being built down because of the economic crisis. And I'd like to challenge the panel to say something about 2 questions: whether they have any idea of how a sustainable healthcare system could look like, which is inevitable to come in the future, and if they do, what are their thoughts on how the Adventist philosophy and ideology, as we had presented here yesterday, could lead the way in how to actually organize a sustainable healthcare system for the modern world. It's not a question whether it has to come, it's just a matter of when.
Dr. Hart, I'll ask you to answer that question.
I assume you're speaking of finances and access and that sort of thing, not lifestyle-related stuff per se, but the access issues. And you're exactly right. I mean, the cost of technology is moving faster than our ability to fund it, and everybody wants to get the latest technology and we can't afford it. I personally believe this is an opportunity for the church, and that there's a chance that we have now to demonstrate that there's more cost-effective ways to deal with population health, and we should be doing that and demonstrating the value to that. We all feel it. Certainly at Loma Linda we feel it. The hospital systems in the U.S. feel it. You do here in Europe. I do need to say one other thing. I think there's many times this misconception that the church subsidizes Adventist health care. In fact, it's very much the other way around. There's millions flow from Adventist hospitals back into the church, not only in salaries of people who then make donations, but in various other kinds of subsidies. So the flow of money, the church isn't being asked to subsidize the healthcare systems. It's really much more the other direction. But we are going to be faced with incredibly new challenges, and we are feeling the same pinch that everybody is in trying to be more effective, more cost-effective, and try to do a better job of utilizing technology appropriately. The whole question, and I was just, where was I just recently reading about this whole thing, I guess it was yesterday in the seminar. Our hospitals here in Germany are getting pressured to sign on to assisted suicide. You know, and there's going to be many things like this that are housed under a cost-effectiveness sort of thing, but in fact, we're going to have to bring church values to bear on that issue. So I hear you very loudly, and it's going to be a huge challenge around the world.
Thank you, Dr. Hart. Pastor, can you...
First of all, I would like to say that I'm very happy to belong to this church and to have this message of health. I'm very happy too to know about these research studies that have been made and that prove that our Adventist message is true. My question is, how long do we need to do more research to have confirmation that our Adventist health message is true? And for me, we don't need any more studies, any more researches, because thus says the Lord has proven for itself. We don't need any more research. Of course, I'm very happy with those researches. I have nothing against those researches. But I think we must move forward and put this message into practice. And I'm very happy to hear Dr. from Weimar Institute. I've been there once. It's a very wonderful place. We need some leaders that believe really in our message and lead the congregations, the institutions in that direction is all we need.
Thank you, Pastor. Who of you, who is going to take that one? Dr. Fraser.
Well, I hear where you're coming from, but let me disagree in one way. The kind of research that I do, I think we do it as scientists now, not so much to prove the Adventist message is right. That's not my motivation. I think you're right. That's behind us in large part. I do it as a scientist because I want to know if dairy is related to colon cancer or soy is related to breast cancer and things of this sort to help the whole community, not just prove that the Adventist Church is right. That's my motivation. But let me tell you where I think research is very necessary for us as Adventists, and that is to research how do we go about influencing the population and doing all these things we've just said. Research on health promotion. It's got to be done. It's very important.
I would also add that if we had adopted that policy 5 or 10 years ago, we would know about epigenetics, which is a huge new area that plays right into our objectives and so on. So I think it's dangerous to stop asking questions.
Dr. Schultz.
I think a very interesting thing that should be researched would be the effect of Sabbath keeping on well-being. And I know, I believe God, I personally don't need that because, I'm very happy keeping the Sabbath. But I think, to be able to show the world what big effect, and that God was really smart when he said that, some people just need evidence. Thomas?
David.
I think we're all in total agreement that there's still a need to do continuing research. I've done a small amount of clinical research and other research, but to me, the key point that was made that I think many of you responded to is it's true we don't need any more research to say we can trust the inspired counsel we've been given, and I think that's the concern I hear. None of us up here are doing research for that reason. We're trying to be more specific in how we implement the counsel. But really, I hope that we as a church can get away from the worldly research that's pulling us toward moderate drinking and moderate caffeine usage. The Bible, the Spirit of Prophecy principles are clear. This is not in keeping with optimal mental and emotional health first and foremost. The world's not looking at that. So I appreciate the comment.
Could it be that we don't do research to prove these things, but we influence in our research by those principles, which I think that we've all benefited from. We've got 2 more questions, so we're not going to take any more. Just Pastor.
Yeah, basically 2 very simple questions. What do we do in order to communicate that Adventists are the healthiest people in the whole world? I just checked on the internet this morning, and in the first 10 pages, healthiest people in the world, there's no mention of Adventism. It's more on Iceland, Japan, Sweden, and New Zealand than any word on Adventism. So I just would like probably to raise the awareness that when we communicate this evangelistically and people are checking on our word, they would say, but I haven't found Adventists on the internet. And my second question is, have we done or do we plan to do any comparison study between Adventists and Orthodox Jews? Because there is another almost biblical community who probably could show some very interesting data of of comparison.
Dr. Fraser, you want to take that one?
Well, you raise good questions. And I think that we do have a challenge as a group to use the media in the most effective way. But, having said that, there are other research groups from Harvard and so forth that are doing, and not only there, the famous EPIC study from Europe as well, doing very good work. And they're kind of complementing what we're doing, finding many of the same things. But I don't know what you were looking at on the internet, but I come from New Zealand, and whatever you saw about New Zealand being the best and the longest lived people in the world, that's very suspect data, I can tell you. It's a primary produce country that is very major on meat and dairy and so forth. They're not the longest lived. They have bad rates of cancer and all kinds of things. So, but yeah, I think we need to do a better job. As far as a study comparing to Jews, that's an interesting idea. There's no such thing underway that I know of. One can think of all kinds of interesting comparisons one can make, but unfortunately we just don't have the manpower and the ability to finance such things at the moment.
Thank you. One last question.
Good afternoon. I want to start saying that it's really hard to be here in front, to be young and face these experienced people. And I have been blessed by the possibility of studying in non-Adventist and Adventist institutions. I'm from South American background, and I have been 7 months now living in Europe, doing my practices as final stage of medicine. And I have been able to learn medicine based on science, and I have been able to get to know Ellen G. White writings deeply, and I love them. And I have seen how my heart is getting broken a bit in this European society when I'm in church and I see that it's a big struggle in our church, that people is stepping out of the church because we are being so hard sometimes in the way of putting rules in something that Ellen G. White is not saying, and living many times in church as is our diet, is the basis or a spirituality of religion, our Christianity. And as a daughter of God, I have been asking myself, what should we do? Because I will be a doctor. I want my patients to live better. And we have been studying what healing is, what is really being better. Many people will not be better related with the diet, but related with their emotions and how they feel so rejected. And they come to church trying to find Jesus, and they get rejected too, because your diet is so bad, and your life is so bad, and you are getting a divorce. People don't divorce. The Bible doesn't allow that to happen. And the small answer that I have been getting, and I would like you to help me with it, is that we should follow Jesus as doctors, as nurses, as theology people. He went in the world, he get the own clothes of the people, he feed the society with fish and bread, he multiplied it. Didn't he want them to live longer? I think of course he did. But I don't have interest in granting 100, 150 years, if possible, to my patients in this earth and missing the heaven. I want the church and I want my patients to reach eternal life. And I pray that I'm not an obstacle with strong sayings in their way to heaven. And I think it's a good question for us. How can we bring healing to the people as Jesus wants us to do it?
David, I'll take this one.
Okay.
Sorry.
You got it. You're the boss.
Sister, you couldn't verbalize better the intentions of this conference. It's not just for us to be healed from our cancer or whatever, but it's for us to be healed as a group. We need this healing. We need to stop looking at each other suspiciously. with critical attitudes, with judgmental attitudes. If we are like that, perhaps we have not met the true character of Jesus. Perhaps we have not met him face to face. Perhaps there is a long path for us. Perhaps it's not so long. Perhaps it just takes a little decision in our minds and in our hearts. And that decision could perhaps put us in a position where we will look with gratitude to people who are investing highly, not just in creating a name for themselves, but to helping the millions, the hundreds of millions, the thousands of millions of people in this world, by helping them to say, hey, colon cancer could be avoided. As a father, I tell my child, you know what, Daniel? I don't think that that's the best for you. These gentlemen are saying, let us do that for the world. Perhaps with that attitude, it's just a switch. We could look at our neighbor, the person sitting next to us, and he says, you know, brother and sister, I love you. I love you no matter what you do. We heard from Carol Squire yesterday that when her son was going in a path that took him away from all the things that he knew, God very strongly convinced her to do what? To love him, to be beside him. And you know, I would like to end this, and I'm sorry, I took over the panel here, because this is a very deep subject. It's very deep in my heart, and I passionately speak about that. When Jesus said to the disciples that they would be known by something, they would be known by the crosses they wear. Now, would they be known by the logos they have in their conferences or in their churches? No. What would they be known by? By what you've just described. By these shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. Do we need healing in our church? Do we need to look at Loma Linda, at Weimar, at an institution that is not even a church institution, University of Regensburg? Do we need to look at each other, even outside this room? The person in the reception who is not a Seventh-day Adventist, do we need to look at each other with love and compassion, as if they are part of us, sharing with them the message of Jesus? I believe we need healing in that, and I would like to invite you now to pray together with me. Pray for this healing in our hearts, the healing of the pain that judgmental attitudes and critical attitudes bring to each other and to us as a body. Our Father in heaven, we've learned so much today. I thank you, Lord. We thank you for Dr. Schultz, Dr. Fraser, Dr. DeRose, Dr. Hart, the people they represent here, the thousands of researchers, people in these institutions all over the world, Lord, Loma Linda, the big institutions, but also the small ones, family run. I pray, Lord, that the Holy Spirit may be in the hearts of the people working and ministering in these different places, that we may look at each other with love, with understanding, that we may pray for each other. And Lord, I also pray for healing of ourselves individually, that as we've learned now we may put into practice that which you've shared with us, you've given us. But I also pray for healing in your church. Lord, that your love may bind us together. As we leave this room this this morning, this afternoon. We pray, Father, for grateful hearts for your presence and your mercy towards us. That you may go with each one of us and be with those watching at home. May you be with them too, Lord, that healing may be part of their lives as well. In Jesus' name we ask you these and thank you. Amen.